Hello, everyone. Today I was called to talk about an interesting topic which a lot of people nowadays in the world are concerned about, and this is the topic of narcissism. And I would like to share a spiritual perspective on narcissism, what narcissism is from the spiritual point of view, because we have multiple opinions and ideas of people who are in the field of psychology and psychiatry, mental health. The observations that are going to be shared here are a personal perspective and are not any sort of perspective based on any form of knowledge. So what is narcissism and how to deal with it? The most important to understand is that how narcissism is shaped. What is it? And through my observations, I realized that narcissism is basically, if you look at the identity, is the unwholesome identity, underdeveloped identity. So when people are children, when we are children, we're born into this world, we have certain circumstances in our lives, parents, backgrounds, social backgrounds, religious, cultural, but more so it is our home environment that shapes our identity. And in my observation, I would say that everyone suffers one or the other form of narcissism, and it's because narcissism is it's a syndrome or a disease of remaining a child, remaining in that unwholesome, underdeveloped identity, even while having a grown-up body. So basically, narcissism is being a child, remaining a child, not growing out of the childhood and not shaping into a wholesome identity, not becoming an adult. So if you look at the society, you see that the majority of people are not adults. They're trying to play a role. They're trying to put a mask of an adult, a successful person, and they try to hide behind various forms of material achievements or some sort of achievements, emotional avoidance to protect themselves. And yet at the core, they are still children. And from the spirituality or spiritual point of view, you see that it is a being basically who has not developed their wholesome identity. So they've remained codependent for life. And when they are born, they are naturally dependent on their parents and their primary caretakers, and this is fine. But with time, they, either because of their parents or because of their culture, they do not develop their natural autonomous identity, so they do not grow out of the parental wing or out of that codependent dynamics which is prevalent in their family. They forever remain codependent on the external reality. So from the spiritual point of view, these beings develop some sort of a energetic codependence or vampirism. So most of the people in this day and age are energetic vampires, and it's because they are used to depend on other people for their emotional supply, for their validation, for getting something out of the relationships or the material environment. So they learn multiple level or the multiple level of codependency, kind of. They depend on the supply of material things from their parents at first, food supply, emotional supply, and so they are pushed to manipulate their parents, their caretakers, their environment, to give them more. And this is because they do not develop, they are not pushed to develop their autonomy. So a narcissist is a being who does not have autonomous perception of reality. They have the perception of reality as being an extension of their parents, of their environment, of their culture, of their religion, etc., etc. So such beings are not, which is most of the people on this planet in this day and age, are not autonomous. Definitely we're not able to be fully independent because we are a part of the collective. But these people do not develop energetic autonomy, nor they develop emotional, mental, or any type of autonomy. Their existence relies entirely on pieces of reality which they hold on to. For example, they hold on to scientific proofs. They hold on to someone's emotional validation. They hold on to someone else's hear and say. They hold on to someone else's ideas and thoughts and paradigms of reality, someone else's ideology. And so they become an extension of that ideology, that paradigm, that scientific evidence, supporting it with their consciousness, and yet depending on it. So their existence depends on these elements and is validated by them. If you take these elements away from them, they will feel helpless, they will feel insecure, they will feel fearful, they will feel literally like their life, their world has crashed, everything is collapsed, nothing is true, and they need to just hold on to something else or get something else. And so when you look at these people, they are literally children, because it is like a child who, you know, throws a tantrum when he's not given something, or when some element is taken away from them. And so they proceed into life with these tantrums, with these ideas. They constantly fight, they constantly invoke drama in life, they constantly need other people or other people to generate emotions, or other people to give them some validation, or other people to acknowledge their existence, even if this acknowledgement comes to them through a negative scenario, like, for instance, throwing a tantrum or becoming dramatic. So it is normal when the person is developing developing their identity between the age of 2, 3 and the age of, let's say, 15, 16. But when it goes further, or when it continues into their adulthood, it becomes a problem, because they're pushed to be independent, yet internally they cannot be independent. And so here is the beginning of their demise and their problems, because they start going into a dating or relationship scene where they start looking for supply there. They start looking for a replica of their parents, or someone who reminds them of their parental home, or their first experience of care and love. And if that home wasn't filled with love, these people will create ideas about love. For example, ideas they get through music or movies, or watching other people. And so very often these people have no idea who they are and what they want. So basically, everyone who is a narcissist or has narcissistic traits is the person who has underdeveloped identity. They're still a child, even though in a grown-up body. And the question arises, how can you build a relationship with a child? And child with a child cannot build a relationship. That's where we're facing divorces and issues in people's relationships. We face so many mental health issues, and all of these issues are rooted at one root cause, which is underdeveloped identity, or the identity of a child being in a grown-up body and having demands of a grown-up, but yet having that identity of a child that is incapable of taking responsibility for their action, being confused, not knowing what they want, not knowing how to relate to other people in an autonomous way, how to create proper distance, how to allow other people to be themselves, because they have no idea, no reference point of how can they be on their own by themselves, autonomous. And so it takes time. And when people step on a spiritual kind of a journey or they think so, they usually look for another validation. So they try to find this validation through spiritual writings, through spiritual journeys, through spiritual paths, and spiritual schools or different philosophies. But yet the root cause is not dissolved or eliminated or even acknowledged. And the root cause is that they are not content and fulfilled within. So they are not even aware of how they generate this negative energy, the negative energy, which requires, which is like a vampirism, which requires other people's energy, emotional supply for their validation. And even though they step on a spiritual path, very often they generate themselves very negative energy, not being aware of why this is happening. And they think that they are maybe a victim of someone else's negative, energies or spiritual attacks. And yet no attacks can come through unless this person generates the same frequency. And so they cannot understand that it is not about, life is not about what they say or what they believe in, but it's about them and their own contentment and fulfillment. And until they realize that, they keep on gliding along the surface, trying to find just another supply, new supply, whether in the form of ideology, new religion, new spirituality, new spiritual path, something more exciting, or a new relationship, or a new career, new job opportunity. So this childhood or childish attitude does not allow them to concentrate and be there responsible for their every action, think before they act, because that would be an adult. But a child cannot really have an extended perspective of their actions or potential actions. So they just jump into conclusions, jump into actions as any child would do, and they lose very often interest or concentration. Like a child would be playing with one toy and then would be bored with that toy and shifts their perspective into another object of interest. And the same happens with each and every individual. We're dealing with people who are in adult bodies, but who have not developed further than, 5, 8, 12-year-old. And their concentration, their level of responsibility is defined by that underdevelopment. And so at this point, spirituality needs to address one and only point, is how do we heal and restore our wholesome identity? So at this point, we're not talking about high forms of spiritual knowledge and frequencies, because it's just but irrelevant, because the majority of people cannot contain that knowledge. All they create out of this knowledge is they hook onto it. They try to create a sense of self through that knowledge, and again validate themselves as being powerful and important, although knowledge does not validate us as long as it is outside of us and not a part of our own being. So these beings are incapable of perceiving the true essence, and that's why they're so codependent on the projected reality. And when there is no supply, they become anxious, restless, very easily angered, inconsistent, incapable of keeping focus on one point, and really, really, I would say, evil sometimes. And evil means ignorant, because ignorance pushes these people into further search for supply and validation. Usually these people end up hurting themselves through this search, because they end up being a part of something they wouldn't like to be a part of, but yet it's too late. When they realize that something they got involved themselves into is hurting them, or putting them in or jeopardizes their position, then maybe it's too late, and so they feel like a victim again. So if you look at the pattern of behavior of the majority of people, their inability to understand what they're doing, to take responsibility, to feel accountable, to focus within and try to restore their autonomy by simply taking time and giving themselves space, and taking the space between them and someone else, or that element of reality that they're codependent on. creates this sort of a havoc in the reality, and yet they cannot see how they created themselves. They cannot trace it back. But the healing starts from the very fact that they realize that they can no longer depend on others, and they have to start generating their own energy, their own, autonomy, by being focused within, by being all right, safe, and fulfilled within themselves, by awakening to that source of inexhaustible energy within themselves, and only that way start healing themselves, by allowing themselves to be alone instead of constantly resorting to someone else's validation, or someone else's talks, or someone else's comfort, or someone else's supply, on whichever level. Or even resorting to watching, something, or entertaining themselves, or resorting to drugs and stimulation, because all of these are but the signs of a being, of a human being, not being really an adult, but being a child. And narcissism is nothing but this sort of underdeveloped ego, which is childish personality. The personality, because as a child, you can throw a tantrum, you can scream, you can yell, you can stomp your feet, you can demand certain things, and no one holds you accountable, because they reduce sort of this to the fact that you're a child. But when you're an adult, you simply cannot do it. And if you continue doing it, it means you're still, it is considered to be a mental issue or an imbalance, which it is. And it pushes you into the situation where you no longer can continue that way. And if you do not realize that, you will start suffering consequences, which is people will probably avoid you, or would not like to be in touch with you, or they will not want to rely on you in any way or form, shape or form. They would not take you seriously. They would not give you jobs. They would not give you career promotions, because they will see that they cannot rely on you, because you're irresponsible, because all you care of is another supply, and whatever that means. Or if you can't get what you want, you resort to manipulation. Again, that is the way children behave. When they see that they cannot get what they want, they resort to manipulation. Sometimes they plot against their siblings to feel superior. And if we keep on, growing into supposedly an adult with that sort of identity and that sort of understanding of life, eventually we just destroy our life. And a child cannot feel accountable for what they do. They just continue feeling like a victim when they're in the adult bodies, and they drain themselves, vampirize others, become toxic, create toxicity around them, create toxic environment and relationships. And these people are energetic vampires. They generate very, very strong negative current. And negative current means that they just suck the energy out of other people, whether they are aware of that or not. And whenever people shut their door on them, or stop communicating, or do not give them anymore that emotional or whatever supply, they throw tantrums. They start trying to draw attention through calling them, messaging them, or trying to draw attention by doing something mean. And so all of these are traces of a child which is still in the grown-up body. It is the child who resorts to addictions, addictive behavior, because they cannot understand the value of life. So when in terms of relationships, it is impossible to build a relationship between an adult in the adult body and a child in the adult body, because the body can have intimacy, the body can resort to whatever exercise of power, or go and do whatever they want, but the perception of reality is different. The accountability, the level of accountability, the level of awareness, the level of responsibility are very different. And it's simply, impossible to have relationships or healthy dynamics between an adult in the adult body and a child in the adult body, because the one who is the child will constantly throw tantrums, will constantly try to manipulate, will constantly try to codepend, will not understand healthy boundaries, will not understand the fact that every autonomous adult has their own space. So they will not relate to such ideas. They will try to constantly break through the boundaries. Like, for example, a child was trying to draw attention of his mother while she's speaking on the phone, or while she's doing her work or cooking. He will be pulling her. He will be trying to draw attention whichever way. So, and unfortunately, we face this in relationships with these kind of individuals who are still children in the adult bodies. They cannot understand boundaries. They cannot understand no for an answer. And so because of that, they have to be taught these boundaries. And if they cannot accept these boundaries, the relationship becomes toxic, because they will try to exercise their power of an adult while still being a child. And so they will become toxic and try to threaten you, to throw tantrums, to manipulate, and so on and so forth. So narcissism has to be dealt from, again, my perspective, in such a way where the person is their attention should be drawn within. They have to understand, they have to try to understand themselves, that their life is not outside of themselves. Their energy is, their energy supply, even though they find it as valid at this point, is still outside, but it is temporary and transitory. So they have to focus within and understand, perceive who they truly are. And usually what they perceive is not what they like. It is very difficult for that type of person to admit that they're still a child in the adult body. But once they understand it, once they observe and track back how they become anxious, insecure, when they don't get that attention, when they don't get that supply, they may have a chance to cure themselves, to heal themselves by refocusing within. At this point, they're still in a codependent relationship with the external environment. And so when they refocus and take their own power from the external reality, of course, it can't, be over a night or over maybe a year even or so. Maybe it takes years or decades to heal this, the trauma, and to, continue their self-cultivation. But it is definite that if they realize that their power does not lie in the external reality, they take that power back and refocus and start cultivating themselves. Through this cultivation, they can heal. They can realize that the source of inexhaustible energy is within them, and they do not need to rely on other people. So they basically start the process of restoring their healthy identity and growing themselves up when they can be grown up, let's say, through their environment. So maybe they had a toxic environment in the past, or their home was toxic. So they have to basically become their own parent and to regrow themselves gradually. And in this case, before they regrow themselves, before they restore this identity, higher forms of spirituality cannot be really grasped. And so the first step towards the spiritual evolution and the evolution of them as a being who has to grow into an adult starts from this point where they refocus within, when they realize that they have kept empowering the external reality over the years and thought that everyone else knows better, that everyone else needs to validate them, and they feel somewhat nothing because the environment has not promoted that healthy development of their identity. So the best parental or home environment is when the child is given that a degree of autonomy to understand who they are and to develop their own understanding of reality, of their, of themselves, their preferences, etc., etc. But unfortunately, the majority of homes are made of other children. So the parents are also children. So they hold on to certain ideologies, religions, political understanding, social understanding, and they indoctrinate their children because they want their children to be the extensions of them and their indoctrination ideologies and so on and so forth. And so these children are just but the grown extensions of their parents, and the parents are the extensions of their parents and their ideologies and so on and so forth. So this does not promote spiritual evolution, but on the contrary, this promotes a spiritual devolution. And until we understand this, we're forever stuck in these dynamics of unhealthy relationships with the projected reality and the unhealthy codependent perception of reality and ourselves. Most of us do not understand and know who we are or what our essence is, because all we know about ourselves is the extension of our parents, all they believed in, or whatever we are brought in, all the background, environment, people, their opinions and ideas. So we are just but, hubs or carriers of the shadows of the collective, rather than we create our own, and not even create, but rather than we really understand who we are as a spiritual being, as a soul, autonomous being who has its own, perception and understanding. And until that is shaped, we're still not an adult, but a growing child who is trying to, through trial and error, understand what's right and wrong. But in reality, nothing is right and wrong. It is but the ability to really navigate oneself healthily and safely within the environment we are. Because it is so important to understand the right distance between us and the projected reality, knowing, though, that the projected reality is a reflection of our being. And so establishing healthy relationships with the projected reality is a must in order to have this safe environment where we feel safe and protected and validated by our own inner being. If we cannot tap into our being and perceive that contentment and bliss of our own existence, we'll forever be codependent, we'll forever vampirize others, we'll plunge into toxic relationships or create these toxic relationships ourselves, and yet feel a victim. Will continuously go from a victim to aggressor to savior, and will not come out of these unhealthy patterns. The only being who can heal oneself is oneself. And so when we become fully responsible for ourselves, and we take this full responsibility and accountability for our own health, for our own mental balance, we just stop ourselves when we again, or we have this push from within to resort to the childish behaviors, to these patterns of manipulation and pushing others to do what we want. We focus within. Whenever we feel this wave of insecurity, when somebody else takes a distance from us or establishes healthy boundaries with us, we have to focus within and understand that we are already enough, that we are content, and reconnect with our higher being, which is the source of inexhaustible energy, and perceive that fulfillment regardless of whether other people give us attention or reject us or accept us. And this is the path to self-healing and restoration of healthy autonomous identity, which will definitely with time recreate the understanding of relationships between people, between two autonomous adults who take responsibility, who give each other space to be themselves and yet love each other unconditionally. A child does not understand yet what love is. The child understands love only through some sort of supply. When the child receives a hug, they assume it's love. When a child receives what they want, they assume it's love, and they carry the same idea into their relationships. And so all these relationships between a child and a child are based on this sort of supply. As long as the supply is good, it is fine. As soon as the supply is over, something happens that it's not enough, they throw tantrums or try to manipulate each other, and this will definitely not promote any healthy dynamics in a relationship. It will become again a runner or chaser dynamics, or an avoidant and anxious, or any of these dynamics which are basically toxic. And so if people do not grow up, they cannot push others to grow up in a relationship. They have to start with themselves. And the spiritual evolution happens when we restore our healthy identity and realize the frequency of the unconditional love within ourselves. Then only we open up our self to trust and understand life as it is without judgment. The child constantly judges, an adult observes with the expanded awareness. How many adults do we know? There are no adults almost at all at this point. Everyone is a child with their tantrums, with the list of their demands and the list of what they can give. So the relationships are not based on unconditional love and respect and allowing the other person to be. Love is always acceptance, patience, and understanding. It's unconditional, but it is possible only when your own identity is matured and grown into an adult, healthy adult identity. Until then, you will be, struggling and trying and being disappointed and trying again, which is fine. But again, it's important to spend some time on your own where you define who you are, what your true soul needs are, what you would like to see in your life. Because as you become an adult with a wholesome, autonomous identity, you see clearly others for who they are, and you make decisions from your own standpoint, what you want in your life and what you would abstain from. You create healthy boundaries when you see that you're dealing with immature beings. This way, you are adult enough not to create another scenario of failure, because you become accountable, responsible, and you make decisions from that autonomous standpoint, from that healthy identity where you're not codependent on the environment. You are autonomous and you welcome another autonomous being. And if something is not for you, you resolve this through communication. The communication is, again, the healthy communication pattern is possible only with healthy, balanced, and autonomous beings, or adults, in other words. You cannot actually have proper communication with an immature being, because they will strike back. They will throw a tantrum because they cannot focus. They only focus on that which they need. And if that which they need is not given, they throw a tantrum. They start manipulating you, gaslighting, putting you down, because they are not adults. They're children who are playing a role of an adult, and that is narcissism. Thank you very much for your attention. All your comments are welcome. If you're interested in this content, please subscribe. And wishing you all healing and balance. Thank you.